Hey, how's it going, everybody? And welcome back again to another episode of the Stupid Questions podcast. This one is obviously different. It is the end of the season episode. So, this past 1 year, 100 or so episodes. Yeah, first off, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. It really means a whole lot to me that you listen to this podcast. If this is the first episode you've ever heard, I want to encourage you to go listen to some of the past ones first. But if you are here for that, thank you as well. Yeah, I can't express enough gratitude. When I started this podcast, I really had no other intention other than trying to start something that brought a lot of joy to me. I don't know if you guys listened to episode 100, but if you didn't, one of the things that I brought forward was just this idea that this podcast was really a culmination of a lot of my past. Asking people questions has continued to be and has been for a very long time just the bedrock, I think, of how I, as a human, as a man, have tried to grow. I've shared this in a number of different episodes, some more in depth than others, but, losing my father at 16 years old to suicide, no less, left me asking a lot of tremendous questions. And a lot of the times, the questions that I had, I tried to find key individuals in my life who I could ask those questions of by way of action, by way of just observation to try to fill, I guess more or less, the empty pieces of, I felt like my soul, my heart, my experience had. And it's been a joy and an honor through this podcast to ask those same questions, to figure out what makes people do what they do, how they become who they are, and who they are more than anything else. And wow, there's so much to go over this episode. But here's what I've done. Over the past 100 episodes, I took every one of those transcripts and downloaded them, and I threw them into ChatGPT collectively here recently and asked ChatGPT to pull out the through lines that I've learned from those past episodes. And it has given me 10 points to go over. So I'm going to go over those 10 points in the first part of the episode. I will say I have only looked at them briefly because I wanted my answers to be kind of off the cuff, similarly to how I expect my guests to perform, to share on the podcast. I normally don't give them any questions ahead of time, except for if they know about the who question, they can think about that one a bit. But in similar fashion, I'm going to go through these 10 points and give just kind of my thoughts and see what comes to mind. It's not super overdone, which I don't think any of you expect in this podcast, but there is some structure to it. So that's going to be the first part of the episode. And then the second part of the episode is going to be a little bit closer to home, some of the mental stuff, thoughts, vision for the future, thankfulness around this podcast, and we'll just see how it goes. So thank you so much for being here. If this isn't your cup of tea, you can go ahead and skip through. Now we are going to jump into these 10 points, go through the things that I've learned this past year, take some reflection time, and just spend some time together. And yeah, hopefully I learned something about myself a little bit more. Hopefully you guys learned too. And I will say, I have been thinking about this for a couple of weeks now since I recorded my last episode of the season, as I've kind of slowly dripped the last few ones of the season. Approaching this one, I was a bit scareder. Is that a word? A bit more trepidatious. I wanted to do it right. I don't know. I feel like there's an expectation growing within myself and probably within the listener as well as I try to do a better job at this podcast. There's a level of quality I think that needs to be displayed. And so I wanted to make sure that before I jumped into this episode, I had really kind of thought about some of the lessons that I've learned and tried to think about, what things that I could share that would hopefully add value back to you guys. But more than anything, if there's one thing I've learned about anything that is public facing, whether it's music performance or public speaking or even doing the podcast, if it's not coming from the heart, it's not real. It doesn't add as much value, doesn't add inspiration to myself and others, and it's not motivating as well. So in everything that I share on this podcast today, it is my hope, it is my goal to share from a place of truth and experience. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first point is the why behind who people become. This is a topic, obviously, through the initial who question. Sometimes I've asked that question right at the beginning of the episode to kind of get people to jump in, but I've kind of morphed that over time into letting the conversation flow naturally, how I would if I was meeting someone brand new off the street, and then finding the most appropriate time to ask that, usually after I have a little bit more of a history of who they are. I don't know if that's the best way to do it yet, honestly. 204 times, and the majority of those being one-on-one interviews, by and large, probably greater than 180 of them, and I still haven't figured out the best way to do that, to be honest. But to answer that question, or to think about that a little bit more, like the why behind who people become, what I have learned is through all these conversations and viewing my own life, is that what really matters is who you are when no one else is watching. Why does that matter? You guys know from me, I'll get really open and raw about this. I've shared on the podcast a number of times that I've been clean from pornography for 6 months. And that really taps into the who I am, even though no one was watching. Give me just one second. We're going to pause for a second. And why that matters so much is, at least to me, it's so hard to know what a true person's intentions are when we get to know them. I meet with people time and time again, weekly on this podcast, and immediately start drawing a frame of reference to go to as I relate to this person, the questions I ask them, and how much can I trust them, and are they trustworthy? Are the things that they're saying true? Your mind and your body's like going through all of these observations and wanting to understand the person sitting across from you. And no matter how good a person is and seems on the outside, we are all human, and what we do when no one is watching truly matters, because that really shows who we are. I know for me, speaking personally, there will be telltale signs, things that happen in my character that will give a hint to what I'm doing when no one else is watching. With pornography, I think it all ends up time being like sexual jokes. Because if you're thinking about sex all the time, like that's what you're going to make jokes about. It's just like whatever the majority of the consumption is in your private life, I think that is what comes through and overflows on the outset. And so when asking the question like, well, who is whatever, I think that's why most people, when I ask that question, is they give me a kind of a laundry list of things that they do or have done. And there's a human element to that, because I think that, part of our identity is in what we do. But what's more, I think, what is at the bedrock of that is how we do those things, the character traits that we display as we go out and try to be a professional athlete and try to be a father and trying to be a business leader. And I'll tell you how I learned this lesson. I had the opportunity with one of my first businesses to go to a pitch competition in Berlin, Germany. And this pitch competition is essentially, you have your business, you get up on stage, you talk about it, and you basically paint a picture of why people should invest in it. And then there were some investors around who would potentially invest if they were interested. And then there was a prize purse for whoever won the pitch competition. It's basically like a public speaking thing. Whoever can make their thing look the coolest and whatever wins. And as I was preparing for that pitch competition, this was like my second or third one, I was really having this crisis of like trying to figure out how to separate myself from the business, because I realized as I was talking about this business, I was really talking about myself and the things that it was going to do. I felt like I was going to do, and it was so interlocked. But I started to realize the need to be able to separate my identity with this business. And what do I mean by that? Your character traits are what make you who you are. So when I was at this pitch competition in Berlin, I had this slogan for this hammock company that was called Sway, that was comfort, security, and warmth. That's what this product was going to give you: comfort, security, and warmth. And for me, in that point in my life, those were three things that I feel like I did not have. I did not have the comfort of father. I didn't feel like I had that. I didn't have the security of knowing that I could be a man or know how to be a man. And I didn't have the warmth. I felt like at that point in my life, my family was like very disgruntled, and I just felt like those are three things that I was lacking. And so as I was creating this product that was just so happened to be a product that was like a sleeping bag, it would to hopefully keep you comfort, security, and warm out in the elements. As I was trying to diverge and separate these things between like what is the identity of myself versus the identity of this business, I realized that the values, the things that I care about, are helping people feel comfortable, helping people feel secure, helping people feel warm, because in that atmosphere, I think, is when we can thrive the most. So it was at that point when I was preparing for this pitch competition that I realized like, my character values, the things that I care about most, those are values of me that I can put into this business with the Insulated Hammock, or I can put it into this podcast and the people that I talk to, or I can put it into being a father. That's really who I am. And so as I go through and ask these questions, the why behind the who these people are, or figuring out who they are, really who they are, it seems like as we're younger, that's like such a harder question to answer. With a lot of the younger guys, it really is centered around what they do. And a lot of the older men, it's a little bit more centered around their character traits. I don't know if you guys have picked up on that, and I'd be curious to hear what you think. But that's something I've noticed, and it takes a level of maturity. And really, honestly, it's my goal by asking these questions to hopefully help people to think and realize like, oh, what I do doesn't define who I am. the way or the motivations behind what I do and the desire to evoke an emotion or a feeling or an experience in another person by the way I interact with them, those are who I am. Because when I talk to, well, I'll use Larry Upton for an example. When I talked to him about bamboo works and whatnot, he did such an amazing job of like putting affirmation back into me in the episode of like saying, "Oh wow, like this is such a good question," or "Oh, you did your research there." And I think there's some obvious natural chemistry there, but I think that part of his character traits, part of who he is to help people feel empowered and to understand their value. If I think of who else can I, yeah, with Colin Chartier, that was a pretty big episode this year. When I was talking to him, it was really important for him in the way that he was expressing his past experience and the way that he wants to work with others, and to realizing what's really holding you back is kind of your mindset, but what you believe about yourself. And in all of these episodes, like that just continues to come back up, is that I think that is what really makes a person who they are, is how they relate to the person sitting across from them. So that's that one point. Hopefully that makes sense. And then the second point is here, the cost of high performance. And so nearly every athlete, musician, founder, or creator has talked about the sacrifices it takes is family, time, money, stability, mental health, this level of obsession, the loneliness of chasing excellence, the tiny margin between fulfillment and burnout. This is something that everyone has struggled with. And what no one tells you about chasing the big goals is, it's just interesting. You can contrast, I can contrast like my Ironman pursuit with the guest stories and talk about the emotional cost, and not just the training stress scores, right? Because as I started in doing Ironman training the very first time, I was so overly burdened by the numbers. I'll even talk about the 70.3, not even the full Ironman in the beginning. I started to kind of have this hockey stick, and then I start to put all of my eggs in that basket for like, that's where my dopamine's going to come from, is getting higher numbers, getting quicker paces, getting better in the pool, getting a higher age group podium, whatever, or in my business world, getting more sales, getting more people interested, more people on social talking about it. It's just the cost of going to be high performing, I think is something that actually doesn't have to cost that much. But it really comes back down to the who of why you are doing what you're doing, or the why of what you're doing. And if you can answer that question, I don't think it has to cost as much. It's interesting with like Ironman or any high performing individual, especially in the ultra scene. I feel like most people are running from something, whether that's a bad divorce, whether that's a bad experience that they had in life, an injury, some kind of traumatic injury or experience. We all like to do something hard afterwards that seems like almost to like prove to ourselves that we are worth it. And that is a very powerful source of motivation, 100%. But I think oftentimes this cost of high performance, when I've talked to, I would say the majority of people who are Olympians and whatnot, is that, I don't know, it almost costs your humanity to a point, because once you reach that goal, like so many people, they kind of feel lost afterwards and it feels empty. I've talked to a number of Olympians, and when they finish and then they're coming home on the airplane post the Olympics, no one really cares as much because it's over. And so everyone kind of goes back to their respective things, because there's so much attention put on the high performer when they're at their peak, but it all just disappears as soon as they're off their peak. No one cares. Everyone thinks it's so amazing when someone runs across America, but it's only like really interesting when they're like right at the end, or they're 300 days of 350 days in or whatever. And I think that's such a human thing. So the cost of high performance for a lot of people is that they put a lot of stake into that finish line, and then they get there and then it's just quiet. It's crickets. There's nothing else left. And so I think for me, realizing that doesn't have to be the cost of high performance in sport, in business, in religion, and especially spirituality and whatever, because I talk about religion a lot. If I was to put all of my emphasis on just the second coming, I think, of Christ coming back, I think that that's not just it. It's what's promised beyond that. It's the eternity, like to continue to learn, to continue to build, to continue to understand, to explore. There always has to kind of be this pursuit of more, I think. But when it's just the finish line is the focus, we lose sight of the present, of where we are now. And I think even more so, we lose sight of what's beyond that, which is the future for all those Olympians, what's beyond the Olympics. I think it's finding peace with yourself. Yeah, so there's a lot to be said there. But I think to kind of wrap this point up, the cost of high performance oftentimes is family, money, stability, mental health. But it doesn't have to be. I think what it can be is a shift to not just the present, but also the future. Like, how will this affect me beyond what I do, beyond when I get to the finish line of whatever this thing is. Yeah. So the next one is kind of goes along with this. It's the transitions in identity. This was massive across guests, from athletes retiring, musicians shifting careers, people moving from competitor, triathlete to coach, life transitions, in my case, to parenthood, faith changes, letting go of old versions of ourself. The ability, I think this is so important. The ability to let go of quote unquote who you used to be is so important. I've gone through different stages of life, and to be able to separate myself, going back to the who is question, separating myself from the things I've done while taking the experiences and taking the wisdom from them, taking those character traits that enabled me to do that one thing that will hopefully enable me to do even better the thing in the future, is so important. And I think it's even more important for people who've done things that are just not good, bad, whether it's criminally related, whether it's work related, it was just a bad experience, whatever it is, to be able to especially separate yourself and to realize that, well, who I was yesterday does not dictate who I am today. That doesn't mean that there aren't tendencies that push us in a certain direction. But I believe that with the right people we surround ourselves with, but more importantly, the right mindset around who we are in the eyes of an all-powerful God who loves us as as his sons and daughters, that's what allows us to have that transformation. In the religious terms, it's a baptism. In triathlon terms, it's going into the off season and going and searching for some new goal, whatever it is. Like, you have to transform. There has to be some transformation. And in order to truly transform, you have to let go of the old and put on the new. So yeah, I think that's a good way to wrap up that point. So the fourth is faith, morality, and meaning. So as you guys know, not every guest that I've had is deeply religious, but many touch on how suffering has led them to faith or ethics in a chaotic world. It's interesting, the role of belief in staying grounded. Most people talked about this, like the ability to kind of get grounded or to realize what matters most in the most intense portions of a race, in the most intense portions of a training block or schedule. Yeah, like for me, my own reflections with this, especially recent ones on like sin, fatherhood, the pornography stuff, dealing with anger, they pair beautifully with this theme, especially with me, because I know I am deeply religious, and trying to always find my way forward. To find meaning in something, we have to stop and appreciate, I think, the humanness of where we are. For the past several months or so, I've been getting kind of burnt out with the podcast because I was trying to record too many episodes to create a backlog. When I first started, I was doing one a week, and it was going really well, and I had like this huge backlog. But then I was like 3 or 4 months pre-recorded, and it was a little crazy. It created this need to have more people lined up and a lot of scheduling. And I don't know what it was, but this season of life that I'm in, or just God, I don't know what you want to call it, the universe, a lot of people were falling through, and I was scrambling to get guests on. And I think I became a little less driven by my curiosity to get people on because of who they were, and more of just, I need to fill a spot. And I think that came through because my overall motivation started to wane a little bit. And when that goes out the door, kind of how I was saying at the very beginning, like when my heart isn't in it as much, the curiosity just doesn't come through and the conversations aren't as good. So, I realized like, okay, I need to slow down a little bit. Obviously take a break, which I'm about to do, but also more or less like having people come in and only be a part of this podcast that I'm really interested in. So I'm committed to that for the next year. And I have quite a list. So we'll get into that hopefully here in a little bit toward the end of this. But point 5, mental health, suffering, and emotional intelligence. So from the endurance athletes to the business owners to the musicians, people have struggled with and continue and always will struggle with, but anxiety, depression, addiction, Learning to live in the heart instead of in the head, that's a huge one. Learning to like yourself, that's a huge piece. And the discipline of emotional self-awareness, this was such a huge theme, especially, in the episode with Adam Campbell. I don't know if you remember him, but he was the guy who lost his wife in an avalanche, had been struck by lightning, and a number of different things. Just the ability to look at yourself, and if you realize you're burnt out, if you realize you need help, if you realize you need rest, you got to take that rest. And I think the only way that we really start to develop that self-awareness and emotional intelligence is to slow down a bit. It's so interesting. I heard on a podcast that I really like listening to, Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson. You should check it out if you haven't. It's so good. One of the things he was sharing is that, you really can tell what a person cares about by their shower thoughts. And most of us, when we go in the shower, there's nothing else going on. We're just kind of washing our face, body, brushing our teeth, whatever, if you do that in the shower, if you're European. And you can tell a lot about yourself by what those thoughts are. And I realized that the reason that is so potent and powerful is because, well, that's when we're not distracted. So making sure that we have time set apart when we're not distracted by any screen or anything else, and we're just kind of focused on one task, can help with that self-reflection. And that's why I think swimming, biking, and running is so powerful, especially when you're not listening to music. I would say even when you're not listening to music, because that enables you to kind of process through thoughts. And I think that's how you build self-awareness, is like spending more time with yourself in silence. It's so important. And if we don't have that, if we're constantly putting stuff inside, then you end up empty. Or worse, you end up just kind of spewing out what you've already taken in. And so opinions become non-original. There's no such thing as like a critical thought or, your own creative thought, or just a way to think about something differently. We end up being just models or replications of everything that we've taken in. So if you want to be unique, take some time to be silent with yourself. I think that's super important. So let's go on to the next point. The myth of making it. From pros, so we're talking about triathlon, cycling, music again, business owners to entrepreneurs. Everyone thought making it would feel different than it actually did. Success does not heal wounds. You can have a big resume and feel empty. And when it comes down to it, real success is internal stability plus aligned values. So that really goes back to the who is question. And going back to like the feeling of like the drought after a huge race, or an Olympian coming home from the Olympics, whether they were successful or not, first place or 25th place. Everyone thought that getting there would feel a little bit different, and it always does feel amazing to get there in the beginning, but then that emotion evaporates so fast. But, I've been fortunate enough to get to know quite a few millionaires and even a few smaller billionaires. And as I've gotten to know these people, if there's one thing I realize that they have shared with me, is that they value time above all else. And that's because their time is constantly being grabbed for. And most of them, in their relentless pursuit of more, did not find what they were looking for. Oftentimes, I would say every time, it ends up feeling empty. There's this old saying, mo money, mo problems. And that's so true, because with great money comes great responsibility, I think. And you can abuse that responsibility. And also, when you have so much at your disposal and it's cheap and it costs nothing, like convenience is the killer of all good things. And so whether you're wealthy or at the peak of wherever you are, you kind of forget what it was like to fight for something. And it is that pursuit of trying to make it that is, I think, what we should find the most joy and peace in. Yeah, because it's like there's no such thing as made it. When we all are dying on our deathbed, if we ask that person, or we ask ourselves, did you make it? I think we're going to measure that, use the yardstick of how much time we spent with our family, and did our children love us? Did our spouses love us? Did we love our spouses? Did we love our friends that are closest to us? I think that's what making it is. It's not monetary. I'm not saying there's not a place for monetary gain, and I'm not saying that being rich or being a billionaire is a bad thing. I hope there's a few billionaires out there that can say that they've lived a good life and that their family loves them. Same with entrepreneurs and high-performing athletes. But I think if we really got to it at the end of the day, most of them are not going to care about any of the things that they did. They're going to care more about what values they expressed to those that they loved and how that enriched their lives. So it really keeps circling back to this who is question. It's really interesting. So point 7, the quiet power of community. So I have constantly talked about, when asking this who question, like who supported them, who shaped you, Who did you learn from? How did your parents affect the way that you grew up? Who are your mentors? What's your spouse like? Training partners, community. So within all of these episodes, I've asked this question and these questions, and I've realized that community is so key. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know this. Like, community is so incredibly important. But I think that there's really just one thing to take away from this is that no one gets anywhere alone. It's communities that build great people. There's some people who don't have much community, and their community can be with just like a small one or two people. But I think that for holistic growth and to find the most pleasure in life, kind of what we were talking about before with the billionaire situation or the Olympian, you're going to care about what you're doing a whole lot more if you can bring more people on that journey with you. I used to really have this thought, and you guys may have heard me say this on the podcast before, that if there were just 12 of me on a soccer team, then it would be the perfect soccer team. And I had that desire and I had that belief for so long when I was younger. And it really wasn't until I got older that I started to realize, like, oh, maybe I'd be really good at like one particular thing on the soccer field. But in terms of like the diversity of thought, the diversity of expression, the diversity of skill, weaknesses as well. The diversity of weaknesses is what, like, we're all strong together because we can plug in all of our strengths and let our weaknesses become the strength of another. I think that's super important to realize, that if we want to have true fulfillment, if we want to have the best experience in life, it's often when it's shared with others. So I'll leave that to that point. So point 8, becoming someone you're proud of. So this theme has become more pronounced lately, I think, because of the soon-to-be arrival of my little daughter. We have decided on the name Noelle, by the way. Noelle Haven Hill. So, I've talked a lot about discussing character over achievement, doing emotional work, becoming kinder, more patient, more rooted, becoming the person that my child would admire. So there's a question here written for me from ChatGPT is, who am I becoming, and am I proud of that person? I don't know if I can say that I'm proud of the person. I am so far. I am proud of... What am I proud of? I'm proud that I have learned how to be consistent over time. I think I'm proud of that I've been able to be consistent over time. My first thing that I really finished, and I mean like really finished through to its completion, I think it was like my college degree. I don't love the college system, but it was the first thing that I completed that was like a long haul thing that needed a lot of attention and focus. And as I've gotten older and have graduated from college and have gone on to start other things, I feel like I have truly started to see things through to the bitter end. Oftentimes it was with failure in the business world. But with triathlon, like I've been doing it for 5 years now. I've done 3 full Ironmans, and I'm probably close to 10 or 11 half 70.3s. And if there's one thing I'm proud of, I think I'm proud of my consistency and my desire to try harder. But honestly, guys, even in my marriage, it's so hard for me at times when, I'll just be super open and honest. Like, my wife goes through her own struggles and on the mental health side. And at certain points, and I think this is true for everyone, but at certain points in her life, like, she's more sensitive to my just kind of brashness or my words than others. And whenever she's more sensitive, I become even more aware of like, okay, these are things that I can work on to be like softer and kinder and more loving. And man, whenever I fail in those instances, whenever I do something that makes her cry, it makes me feel absolutely horrible. And this is something I'm going to have to really work through whenever I have a daughter, because I'm sure that she'll be sensitive in a way too. And there's always this, these stories we hear about fathers with their sons or fathers with their daughters where like they were hard on them. And then, it takes till the son or daughter gets to their 20s when they can be like, thank their father for, who they are, even though they were kind of a hard man. I don't necessarily want to be that, but one thing I'm going to struggle with, I think, is whenever I do something that makes my children cry, it's going to be so hard for me. I don't know why, like tears, when I see someone crying, it really hits me. It's like I feel it. Even to a point of a fault, maybe. If someone is crying, even if they're in the wrong, it still cuts so deep to me because it's like, oh, they're experiencing such a real, raw emotion. And whatever they're feeling, whatever they're believing internally, whether it's right or wrong that's circled around that emotion and that expression, they're still feeling it. So how can I help them feel loved again? And from like a position of when having kids, I imagine when it comes to disciplining, it may be harder for me to be disciplined enough to help them, guide them along the right path. Like I don't want to, I'm at danger, I guess, of what I'm saying is that to giving too much, just like catering too much to someone because they show emotion. So that's something I'm going to have to work on. But am I proud of who I'm becoming? I can't truly honestly say that I am proud of who I'm becoming yet. I don't know. Maybe I can. Maybe I should. Maybe I should say that. Like I am proud of who I'm becoming. And yeah, you know what? As I'm saying this, I'm going to choose to say that because I think it's important to have that belief in that I am becoming something more beautiful. You know, something I pray for every morning is for God to come into my heart and help me to live a life that is more a reflection of Him, but very importantly, is to help people feel like they are loved. Specifically in my marriage, one thing I pray about is for God to help me love my wife like He loves the church. You know, for those who may be confused about what that means, just think about Jesus on the cross, whether you believe it or whether you believe in Christianity or not. I believe Jesus was a real person. He came to rescue the earth from the bitterness of sin, and the people who He called like His special chosen people, the Israelites, literally crucified Him, hung Him on a tree, and ripped His skin to shreds and spat on Him. And He still went up on that cross and died for them. And that's the kind of love that I want to have for my family, my wife, and even my fellow man. That is a love that is so hard to understand. To love someone so much that you can sit there and watch them abuse you and just take advantage of you, but to still have a heart that loves the inner child of whoever that perpetrator is like something I really pray for. So I am proud that I'm trying to become that. So that's point 8. But this 9th point is curiosity as a way of life. So the entire premise of my show is to ask better questions, to help guests think deeper, to probe into the uncomfortable, which I'm trying to get better at. I really am trying to ask more questions and be okay with being uncomfortable. There were a few times this year where I had some questions written down that I did not ask because I was afraid. I was just afraid. So I'm committing this year to asking some of those questions. I want to be willing to do that. But I need to build, the thing that's hard is like I have to build and I need to build rapport with the guest before I just kind of dive in because I don't want people to be on the defensive. And honestly, the questions I ask, it's more from a position of being curious. But if I ever got to a place where I was asking questions that were accusatory, I don't think that yields any truth. I don't think that curiosity type, if you could even call that, reveals any truth. Definitely doesn't expand empathy in any sort of a way. So, yeah, curiosity is something I definitely want to continue to lead with. And yeah, this curiosity of this podcast has changed my life in a number of ways. You know, back in August, I gave myself a month to find 5 new opportunities, or excuse me, 1 opportunity that I could employ myself in going into the new year to give my wife the option to be a stay-at-home full-time mom. And in doing that, I gave myself like a month. I found 5 opportunities. None of them have materialized into anything super solid yet. They've materialized in that I've had conversations and it looks like some stuff's going to start in the new year. And I'll share that whenever that time comes. But nothing is signed, sealed, delivered. It's kind of waiting and pending upon the new year. That's where I am. It is filled with curiosity. And I want to continue to make sure that fire is stoked and that I don't burn myself out. So that's that. And then the final one here to kind of wrap up this 10th point recap is what my guests taught me about suffering. I think this is a good one to end on. So what my guests have taught me about suffering. Suffering's a good thing. I think on this earth. And I'll preface that with saying if you can find healing after the suffering. Anybody can go out and smash their bike workout as hard as they can with no recovery until failure. And then if you do that again the next day or even multiple times per day, if you continue to suffer without the recovery and healing, it's nothing. It literally will just kill you. But if you go through traumatic experiences, if you suffer and you find healing afterwards, I think that is what affords the greatest growth of wisdom, of experience, even of monetary value, if that's what you're shooting after. That stress is only as good as its recovery. So, yeah, those are the top pieces of high impact that kind of wrap up those big pieces of stories that I have learned about this past year. Yeah, so now I guess we'll go ahead and move into this final portion of the podcast, and that's talking about some of the big things that were on my mind. So this segment, I'm going to move into a little bit more emotions and just things that I've been thinking about. Some of these points here. The things I've learned about myself. One, I don't want to take sponsorship unless it's something that just excites me to share. I realized that after I did a few of the earlier deals this past year, it just didn't feel right. I didn't want to push any type of a product or service if I wasn't like just truly not only curious about it, but it's something that just excited me to share. Yeah, just not there yet. So that's something I learned. Recording 2 times a week, as I said briefly before, can be pretty dang exhausting. So I am choosing this next year to not do any more than 2 a week. If I have to skip an episode or something, I think I'm going to be willing to do that because, yeah, it ends up being so difficult to come up and perform every week and ask these deep questions if I don't allow myself some time to rest. So that's something that I've learned from this past year. Number 3, this podcast has been a long time coming. I was writing it down. I've had previous podcasts, 3 of them that I did before this had like literally no listeners. So one of them was about my business Sway, making inside hammocks. Another one was about this assisted living company that I was starting. It was a software that was to service a lot of the internal needs for these assisted living centers called Gray Rush. That one I did and learned a lot. And then one I did for a whole year, once a month, called Give Well, where I documented one of my friend's journeys of giving money away each month and just seeing what his lessons were that he learned. So this podcast was a long time coming. Yeah, what you do now will serve you in the future. I would have never guessed that my one-on-one with people in college would have led me to doing this podcast. I've talked in the past about my college experience when I was starting a business, just going downtown Chattanooga and being introduced to so many interesting people and getting to sit down with them and ask them questions about their lives. It really prepared me for this podcast. It gave me an opportunity to learn how to connect with someone interpersonally. And what I realized after all those conversations is similar with the podcast. Once you start talking to these people, things kind of always turn around to talking about the deep things of life. And I really enjoy that. So I would have never guessed that prepared me for where I am today, but that is true. And that's where I am. So here's a few things that I've learned about how people work through my guests. 1, people who perform at the highest level know who they are. 2, everyone is human. People are people. No amount of physical ability or money can change this. We all want the same things. Going back to what I was saying about people on their deathbed. At the end of the day, we're all human. We're all going to care about the same things when we die. Were we loved? Who are the people we love? Do they love us back? How have we enriched their lives? 3, not many feel that they've made it. Some do. I think that there will always be some doubt and always another mountain to climb. So going back to what I was saying about the focus being on the present journey and after the finish line, that future. If you can focus on those things, I think that's what allows you to have the most fulfillment in life, where you don't even have to worry about, quote unquote, making it. And then the 4th one here, those who know who they are the happiest. If you know what values you hold that give you meaning into the way you operate your life and your interactions with others, I think that's what will bring about true happiness. Because if you know who you are and why you do what you do, then you can go do whatever you do with that much more passion, fire, and love. So now I just want to kind of answer a couple of questions that I wrote to myself here about what the future of this show is and what I want it to be. I want it to be a place where I can have on anyone I'm curious about, get to know them from an interpersonal level, and give them a platform to share their story that doesn't judge them for what they're doing. And I mean that in the best sense. So oftentimes for the triathlon world, you'll have the question you ask, oh, how'd you do in your last race? Oh, give us a race recap. Oh, tell us about how you were thinking about it on the bike. Tell us what you were thinking about on the swim. Yeah, I would love to get into the heads of other sports and operating pieces of life. I'd love to get on some Formula One drivers. That's obviously way up there. We'll see if that ever happens. I think it will. I just want to have people on who do amazing things, but not talk about the amazing thing. I want to talk about them as an individual. So that's what I want out of this show in the future. I want to create that community and hopefully enable the community to go out and have conversations with other people that help them see that people are more than what they do. So if you want to go out and have a conversation with Lucy Charles or whoever in the triathlon world or whatever sphere of influence you're most interested in, having a conversation with that person that allows the person to be seen more than just what they do. I think that's what I want out of this show. So where am I going for 2026 and beyond? Yeah, I don't know. That's the true, honest answer to that question. I don't know exactly where this is all going to go. All I do know is that I want to continue to be curious, have people on the podcast who interest me, and build out my network so that hopefully, I can have more and more people realize through these conversations that they are valuable, they are wanted, and they're unique and beautiful individuals. So I think that's what I want out of it. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on through this episode. It's different. It's actually kind of hard. I don't know if I did it well, but if it did and bring any value to you guys, I really appreciate it if you could let me know in the comments. And if there's something you want to see me do more in 2026, if there's any feedback you have, feel free to leave that in the comments, like, review, comment, subscribe, all those things. But for the few OG people who listened all the way through this, you're the real MVP. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for enabling me to continue on this journey. And yeah, I will talk to you guys in 2026 and look forward to continuing the journey ahead. Thank you.